She can dismantle a 5-time Grand Slam champion in straight sets. She can blitz a world number 8 off the court in barely an hour. And she can make 60 million Filipinos believe that tennis belongs to them too. But unless Alexandra Eala fixes one fundamental flaw in her game, she may never crack the top 10. That is the blunt, uncomfortable truth being delivered right now by some of the sharpest minds in professional tennis, and it centers on the one shot every player hits more than any other in a match. The serve. The shot that starts every single point. The shot that, for Eala, remains stubbornly, maddeningly insufficient. Let that settle for a moment. Because to fully understand the weight of this conversation, you need to appreciate how far Alexandra Eala has already come and how improbable her trajectory really is. Born in Quezon City, Philippines in May of 2005, she picked up a racket at the age of 4. By 13, she had left home, crossed oceans, and enrolled at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, a teenager from a country with virtually no professional tennis infrastructure, planting herself at one of the most elite training facilities on the planet. She graduated from that academy. She won the junior girls singles title at the 2022 US Open, the first Filipino ever to claim a junior Grand Slam. And then she stepped onto the WTA Tour and started doing things that nobody from her country had ever done before. First Filipino to break the top 100. First Filipino to defeat a top 10 player. First Filipino to reach a tour-level final in the Open era. First Filipino in the top 30. She reached a career-high ranking of world number 29 in March of 2026, carrying a nation of over 100 million people on her left-handed forehand. Consider the absurdity of that sentence. One young woman, 20 years old, shouldering the tennis aspirations of an entire archipelago. And doing it with a game that is, by nearly every metric except one, already world-class. So when former world number 9 Andrea Petkovic sits down on the Big T podcast with former top 20 player Alison Muchova and says, plainly, I think it's one thing and unfortunately it's a big thing, the serve. It carries a different kind of gravity. These are not casual observers tossing opinions from a couch. These are women who lived inside the WTA top 10, who understand what it takes to sustain yourself at that altitude, who know the difference between a player who can beat anybody on a given Tuesday and a player who can do it week after week after week at the biggest events. Petkovic was unequivocal. She pointed to Eala's week in Dubai earlier this season as evidence of what becomes possible when the serve clicks. In that tournament, Eala landed over 60% of her first serves and was hitting her spots with precision. The result was devastating. She torched world number 8 Jasmine Paolini 6-1, 7-6 in the second round, a performance so dominant in its first set that Paolini looked like a spectator. When Eala's serve functions, Petkovic argued, the rest of her game becomes unlockable. She takes the ball so early, she returns at an elite level, and she can essentially beat anyone on the planet. But then Petkovic delivered the counterpoint. In the year and a half she has been watching Eala closely, the serve has been wildly inconsistent. There are weeks where the first serve percentage craters, where the second serve becomes a floating invitation for opponents to tee off. Against the power hitters who populate the top of the women's game, Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Coco Gauff, a vulnerable serve is not just a weakness. It is a death sentence. It does not matter how well you return, how cleanly you strike the ball from the baseline, or how electric your movement is. If you are handing free points on your own service games, the math of a tennis match turns against you. You are constantly playing from behind, constantly needing to break serve to stay level, constantly under the kind of pressure that erodes confidence over the course of 3 sets. Muchova added another layer to the diagnosis. She agreed on the serve, then expanded the lens. She talked about physicality, about the need for Eala to get stronger, to put more weight behind her shots. Right now, she argued, when Eala goes up against the very best, a Jessica Pegula, who combines placement with genuine pace, or a Sabalenka, who simply overpowers, there is not enough behind the ball. It is not a question of talent. It is a question of physical development. And Muchova was careful to note that she has no doubt Eala will get there. but it will take time. It is a process. Now, step back from the technical analysis for a moment and look at the broader picture. What Petkovic and Riskammertraj are really saying is that Alexandra Eala already possesses nearly everything she needs to be a top 10 player. Her return game is among the best on tour. Her ability to take the ball early and redirect pace is exceptional. Her court sense, her tactical awareness, her capacity to read patterns and exploit geometry, these are gifts that cannot be coached into someone. You either see the court the way Eala sees it, or you do not. What she lacks is the one tool that would tie all of those gifts together into a consistent, week-over-week threat at the highest level. And the proof is sitting right there in her results. This season alone, Eala defeated Iga Swiatek at the Miami Open in 2025, taking out the five-time Grand Slam champion and former world number 1 6-2, 7-5 in the quarterfinals. That was not a fluke. She was the better player on the day, and it was not particularly close. She beat Paolini in Dubai. She took down Coco Gauff at Indian Wells. She beat Madison Keys. She has assembled a collection of scalps over the past year that most players outside the top 20 would envy. And yet her ranking fluctuates. She reached 29, then after a brutal 6-0, 6-2 loss to Karolina Muchova in the fourth round of Miami this year, she plummeted 16 spots to 45. That kind of volatility is the signature of a player who can reach extraordinary heights, but cannot yet sustain them. The Muchova match is instructive. Watch the numbers. Eala made just 52% of her first serves and won only 36% of her first serve points. She won 18 points on serve in the entire match. Muchova won 28. The Czech did not even need to play particularly well to dominate. She simply leaned into Eala's serve, applied pressure, and watched the Filipino wilt. Muchova conceded only 6 points in the entire opening set. 6-2 on serve, 4 on return. Eala did not reach game point until the third game of the second set. By then the match was effectively over. It was an hour of tennis that laid bare, in the most painful possible way, exactly what happens when a player of Eala's caliber goes into a match without a functional serve. Now here is where the conversation gets genuinely interesting. Because the question is not whether Eala can improve her serve. The question is whether the historical record suggests she will. And there is a very compelling precedent sitting right at the top of the women's game. Aryna Sabalenka. Go back to the start of 2022. Sabalenka opened her season by committing 39 double faults in her first 2 matches. 39. She lost to Kaia Kanepi in one of those matches with 21 double faults. She finished that entire year with 428 double faults across the season. The serve was not a weakness, it was a crisis. Commentators called her the queen of double faults. It was not a term of endearment. And yet, through biomechanical work, through relentless practice, through a mental recalibration that took years of patience, Sabalenka rebuilt her serve into one of the most lethal weapons in the women's game. She went from a player who could not trust her own toss to a player who won 3 consecutive Australian Opens. That transformation is relevant because it demonstrates something crucial. A serve is not a fixed attribute. It is not like height or hand speed. It can be fundamentally reconstructed. And Eala is 20 years old. She has time. She has resources. She trains at the Nadal Academy, one of the finest facilities in the world. She has a left-handed delivery, which inherently creates angles and spin variations that right-handers struggle with. Brad Gilbert, the legendary coach who guided Andre Agassi, Andy Murray, and Coco Gauff, watched the Muchova match and offered his own assessment. For someone of her height, and especially being lefty, she needs to dramatically improve her first and second serve, he wrote. Shows how good other parts of her game are. That last sentence is the critical addendum. Gilbert, a man who has seen and coached more tennis than almost anyone alive, looked at a player getting demolished 6-0, 6-2, and still felt compelled to note how impressive the rest of her game is. That tells you everything about the ceiling. Eala stands 5 feet 9 inches tall. For a left-hander, that height provides real leverage on the serve if harnessed properly. The wide serve from the deuce court, swinging away from a right-handed returner. The bodies serve up the tee from the ad court. The kick serve that jumps into the backhand. These are weapons that a lefty of her stature should be able to deploy. Last season, Eala routinely served below 90 miles per hour on her first serve, which at the WTA level is essentially offering your opponent a rally ball to start the point. The average first serve speed among top professionals sits around 105 miles per hour. That gap is enormous. Closing it does not require Eala to reinvent herself. It requires targeted work on her ball toss, her trophy position, her leg drive, and her pronation through contact. It requires building the physical strength that Riskammertraj identified as a work in progress. And it requires the kind of repetitive, grinding practice that transforms mechanics from conscious to automatic. There is another dimension to this that often goes undiscussed. The serve is the only shot in tennis that you execute entirely on your own terms. Every other stroke is reactive. You are responding to pace, spin, depth, angle, positioning. The serve is yours. You control the toss, the timing, the placement, the speed. In theory, it should be the most reliable part of any player's game because it is the most controllable. But that control cuts both ways. When things go wrong on serve, there is nowhere to hide. There is no opponent's shot to blame, no bad bounce, no wind gust. It is purely you. And that makes the serve uniquely vulnerable to mental interference. The yips, the tension, the creeping doubt that settles in after a double fault at 30-all. Eala's inconsistency on serve may not be purely mechanical. It may have a psychological component, a tendency to tighten when the margin shrinks, to lose fluidity under the weight of the moment. If that is the case, the fix is not just about biomechanics. It is about building a mental routine, a ritual of confidence around the serve that insulates her from pressure. Sabalenka did exactly that. She worked with a sports psychologist alongside her biomechanics coach, and the combination unlocked everything. What makes Eala's story so captivating is not just the talent or the trajectory. It is the context. She is carrying something that no other player in the WTA top 50 carries. She is not just representing herself on that court. She is representing an entire country's relationship with a sport that has historically been invisible there. When she beat Swiatek in Miami, it was not just a tennis result. It was front-page news across the Philippines. When she reached the round of 16 at Indian Wells, it was the first time a Filipina had done so at a WTA 1000 event. Every match she plays is watched by millions of people who had never cared about tennis before she came along. She has said it herself, she is bringing a new audience to the sport. That is an extraordinary burden for a 20-year-old to carry, and it makes her development as a player inseparable from her significance as a cultural figure. The clay season is beginning now. Eala has returned to the Nadal Academy to train on the red dirt, preparing for the Linz Open and the stretch of tournaments that will define the middle of her season. She will face Barbara Krejcikova, Emma Navarro, Daria Kasatkina, and defending champion Ekaterina Alexandrova. These are players who will punish a shaky serve without hesitation. Every match will be a test of whether the work she is putting in between tournaments is translating to match conditions. The clay will be somewhat kinder to her serve than the hard courts. The slower surface gives her more time to recover, more margin on second serves, more room for her exceptional return game to shine. But it will not erase the underlying issue. At some point, on some court, against some opponent who zeroes in on her service games like Muchova did, the question will return. Can she hold? The answer, eventually, will almost certainly be yes. Everything about Eala's trajectory suggests a player who absorbs lessons, who improves incrementally, who refuses to be defined by a single loss or a single weakness. She was not supposed to be here at all. The Philippines does not produce tennis players. There is no federation pipeline, no network of academies, no tradition of excellence in the sport to draw from. She built this from nothing, with her family's support and her own ferocious determination, and she did it by being willing to leave home at 13 and bet everything on a dream that had no precedent. A player with that kind of resolve does not hear Andrea Petkovic identify her serve as a problem and shrug. She hears it and goes to work. But the window is not infinite. The WTA Tour is merciless in its churning of talent. Young players emerge constantly, each one faster, stronger, more polished than the last. Eala's gifts give her a runway, but that runway has a horizon. The next 2 years matter enormously. If she can bring her first serve percentage into the high 60s consistently, if she can add 10 to 15 miles per hour to her average first serve speed, if she can develop a second serve that opponents respect rather than attack, the top 10 is not just possible, it becomes probable. Everything else is already there. The return, the movement, the tactical brain, the competitive fire. The ability to walk onto a court against a player ranked 30 or 40 spots above her and genuinely believe she is going to win. This is the story of Alexandra Eala right now, in April of 2026. A player of breathtaking potential and a single, glaring vulnerability. A young woman who has already rewritten the history of tennis in her country and who stands at the threshold of something much larger. The experts have told her what needs to change. The evidence supports their assessment overwhelmingly. And somewhere in Mallorca, on a practice court at the academy built by the greatest competitor the sport has ever known, a 20-year-old left-hander is tossing a ball into the Spanish sky, coiling her body, and swinging through it again, and again, and again, chasing the shot that could change everything.